So for those who are unaware, could you briefly summarize the Huntertown History Project?
Yeah, Huntertown History Project actually began in 2016 for me when I was teaching here at Woodford County High School. It was a freshman class, and we did a kind of understood historic research. So Huntertown Project is basically to try to get oral histories and photos and documents and any artifacts from Huntertown community. The community of Huntertown began in 1871. It was an African American hamlet that was settled obviously after the Civil War, and formerly enslaved people in Woodford County purchased land out on Huntertown, at the Huntertown site now. So that's how the whole project began. It sort of grew out of the work I did with students in 2016, and I always said, when I retire, I'm going to work on this project some more, and that's exactly what happened.
So how widespread is it? Is it local, state, interstate?
Well, we're working just locally here in Woodford County right now, and also, though, we've been in contact with people that used to live in Huntertown who live really all over the country. So I've been in contact with people in Ohio, in Arizona, other folks. Actually, through our Facebook page, we have a Huntertown Community Interpretive Park Facebook page. We've had people, contact us through that Facebook page from other parts of the country. But really, what we're doing locally is that 38 acres out on Huntertown Road. It's basically right across from the fire training station that's out there. That is where the old Huntertown community was. And so that 38 acres is owned by Woodford County government, and it's been accepted just recently into the Woodford County, or Versailles Woodford County Parks and Recreation System. So it's now definitely going to be a park. It's going to take several years of work to get it to that point, but it's going to be a park that hopefully will be open to the public, at least with a few trails and a little bit of interpretation by the fall of this year, 2020.
So you mentioned like primary sources and interviews. What's the most interesting thing that you've kind of learned or experienced throughout this process?
There's been tons, but one of the ones that I think is fascinating is I listened to and also conducted some oral histories with former residents. The one I listened to, the gentleman had already passed away, Mr. Buckner. But then I also have interviewed Miss Josephine Carr, who was born there and lived in Huntertown till all the houses were torn down and she was relocated. They bought her property and then she purchased a house in Versailles. So they both talked in their oral histories about my grandmother, they said, used to do laundry and do washing and ironing for people that lived in Richmond or in Ravenna, Kentucky. And I was like, well, how did that happen? There was a railroad called the Riney B Railroad that ran through Huntertown from the late 1800s until about 1932. And that railroad had a whistle stop at Huntertown twice a day. It's actually, the Riney B started in Ravenna and went all the way to Frankfort to the distilleries up through Millville and in northern Woodford County. So they said we used to do laundry, they used to do laundry and they would charge 25 cents a basket for that laundry. And they would sometimes even get presents and things from people in Richmond and Ravenna and Irvine at Christmas time. And so I thought, well, that's really interesting. And I heard it twice in two different oral histories. As a historian, we have to corroborate that data. So in 1910 and 1920 census, when you look at the census from those two years in the Huntertown community, there are 10, 12 women who list their occupation as washerwoman. So we know from the census that actually that was happening up until 1930 when the railroad then closed. So that's just one of the amazing stories that we've found out.
It's really interesting, some kind of confirmation.
Yes. In doing this historic research and then presenting it to the community, like in a couple of weeks, the Huntertown History Display will be in the library here at the high school, but we try to always, corroborate and make sure the context is correct and try to not just take one story as truth. We have to figure out what other context and what other sources we can find that confirm it. So that was just a wonderful day when I said, oh my gosh, the census, it shows that this was really true, just not, folklore handed down through the family.
So you mentioned the project is coming to the library. Is there any kind of context you'd like to give to the listeners or anything that they should, I guess, keep in mind while they're visiting?
Well, one thing I really want, especially the high school students, to realize is this project and my passion for it and the initial research began with freshmen and high school students in that class. And those students are now, they're now freshmen in college, actually. It was that class. And that the context is to understand that this community is no longer there. Unfortunately, there was a lot of flooding and sewer issues that were happening in that area. It's in a lowland area anyway, and when all those houses were torn down, there's nothing left there. And yet, the fact that we can interpret the community, we know that it was a community of African Americans who were former slaves here in Woodford County. And that they came together and they bought this land, and they had enough, they were kind of like entrepreneurs, I feel like, because they bought 5 acres, and one gentleman, Richard Coleman, who was a retired U.S. Colored Troops Army in the Civil War, he bought 26 acres out there and then sold the land, to parcels of the land. So it's really a wonderful story. It was a huge community with a school. It also had many stores out there. They raised hogs, they raised tobacco and corn, there were orchards. Just wonderful stories as you start to uncover history, to know that that's what happened out there. And that it can be a beautiful park, 38 acres, that everybody can enjoy here in the future.
So what's been the most challenging kind of thing about getting this project off the ground, would you say?
The most challenging is really finding people who have some artifacts and documents to share, because people like to see they're beautiful. We have wonderful photographs from the 1950s, most of them, that show families out working out there and people's houses and all of that sort of photographs and documents that you can look at that way. So finding people that still have those documents, because a lot of the people that that lived out there are definitely 70, 80 years old, and a lot of them didn't have the documents or lost the photographs, or never even had photographs. So even finding people that are still around that are willing to tell us their stories, some of that can be challenging at times. And then the other big question is raising enough money and finding the grants to be able to create the park.
Do you accept volunteer help of any kind?
Yes, we will be definitely needing volunteer help. Right now, the Woodford County Parks and Rec Department is working on cleaning up some of the trees that are kind of dangerously need to be cleaned up, that are dead and things like that. But we are going to have work days out there to eradicate some of the invasive species. Of course, we've got lots of winter creeper and honeysuckle and things like that. We will have some cleanup days as well. Unfortunately, people have dumped a lot of trash in certain parts of the Huntertown property. And then we'll be doing a lot of that kind of volunteer work. Also, I'm excited because both students from the middle school and high school, and perhaps other schools, will be part of a Discover Huntertown event in October of 2020, so next school year. And so we're going to have some on-site interpretation where students can tell people, this is where the Huntertown Colored School was, and this is how many students were there, or this is the house of Mrs. T. Cloudis, and here's her story, or here's the house, or here's where Mr. Williams would have lived, and he was a railroad porter, and here's where the railroad went through. So we'll be able to involve students in interpretation on site, and that's another great volunteer opportunity as well.
So at the beginning, you mentioned in 2016, what really inspired you to start this project?
It's really interesting. That's a great question. I taught that class for 4 semesters. It was a semester class that every student who was in the academy program back at that time had to take as a freshman. And one of the parents of a student that I had, Mary Ann Gill's the parent's name, and she came to me when we were having a parent-teacher conference and said, Sue, if you all are doing these projects on local history, you really need to look into this Huntertown area. And her late husband had been part of the project as a magistrate on the fiscal court. And so that's really how it started, is really a parent came to me saying, do you know anything about Huntertown? And I'm like, no, I didn't grow up here. And I was able to start doing research and involved another retired teacher, Mary Beth Rouse, who taught biology. And the students learned about the environmental part of that 38 acres and also the historical story. And so that's how it all started, and it was thanks to a parent that came to me and told me something about this former community.
So what specifically are you planning to do with these 38 acres?
Right now we're working, interestingly enough, we're working with the University of Kentucky Landscape Architecture students. They have a program there. And next fall, they'll be looking at Huntertown and beginning to develop a master plan. But the idea for it, that really started with a grant that was submitted in 2012, and then the county did not get the grant, didn't receive the grant. But the idea is to develop trails that will go through the 38 acres and also be able to interpret the site. Here's where the school was, here's where this person lived, etc. Here's what an African American hamlet, a free town where formerly enslaved people gathered together and lived together in community, would have looked like. And there are many free towns actually in central Kentucky. Zion Hill is one of them. We talk about Russelltown and Furmantown and other areas of Woodford County that were once African American hamlets as well. So we'll be doing bike trails, walking trails, some hiking trails. There's some wooded areas, some pretty good areas there to do some hiking. We hope to have picnic shelters out there, or picnic areas where people can, enjoy a picnic. It's connected really on the backside to the subdivisions on Huntertown Road, and it's really the only green space park available on that side of the city, on that east side of Versailles. So eventually we'd like to interpret where the railroad went through. There's lots of dreams to have a pavilion out there, some type of picnic pavilion where former residents could come and be able to have a picnic out there in a place where they once lived. So it's really a passive park. It's not going to be baseball fields and soccer fields and stuff. A passive park, a nature sanctuary, so to speak, with trails and then signage and different ways to interpret the space. And that's what we'll be working with the UK landscape architecture students on, in developing kind of a master plan for different ways that we could do that. We'd like to have like a ghost structure of a particular house that was out there, that we know what it looked like. We have a photograph of it. It was built in 1895, 1900, but unfortunately was torn down when all the houses were torn down in 2002 and 3.
So you mentioned other slave communities in central Kentucky. Would you say it's like a hot spot for communities like this?
Well, actually, that's an interesting question. The African American hamlets in central Kentucky are kind of an unusual occurrence, and mainly because, in talking with other African American historians and experts, to me it's amazing that even in 1871, in the Reconstruction period, African Americans at that point were purchasing property. Former slaves were purchasing property. Jerry Gatewood, Richard Coleman, even a woman, Phoebe Burris, who was formerly enslaved here in Woodford County, bought an acre and a half in January of 1872. So the fact that in Kentucky African Americans were allowed to purchase property, a lot of other places in the deep South that might not have been true, even though they were citizens at that point after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. But these communities developed because a lot of times former plantation owners, former owners of what we would call the estates of the bluegrass is what they're often referred to, needed that labor. They needed the labor to work their fields, the tobacco, the hemp, all that. And so they would sell parcels of land, or sometimes give parcels of land to their former slaves, so that they would stay and not migrate north, as many did during that Reconstruction period and later.
So is there anything you'd like to say, like a passing remark to the people of Woodford High School?
I guess, first of all, be proud that really the roots of this project grew from this school and from a class of freshmen 4 years ago that did a wonderful job in learning about Huntertown and discovering things about Huntertown. And also, I think, come and get involved. It's going to be a beautiful park. It's a beautiful 38 acres. There's a lot to see out there. There's a lot of wonderful environmental gems, okay, that can be looked at. And it's think about ways that as groups in this community, in this high school, that you could be involved in really being on the ground level of building a beautiful nature space, green space where people can enjoy, walk, bike, take their dogs, whatever, and enjoy and have fun, and then realize that you're walking in the footsteps of ancestors that lived there, 150 years ago. We're looking forward to 150th anniversary of Huntertown in 2021, and I hope that Woodford County High School students will be part of that. We're really excited for your partnership in this.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.